She was screaming in a way that you can't even describe.
My job as mommy, I'm supposed to make her better, and I couldn't do that.
We just thought, if it's not clear to the experts, then where do we go next?
The doctor came in saying that I might die.
I was worried, intrigued, and freaked out. I didn't know what to make of it.
My worst fear was that my daughter would die right then and there.
Next, two medical mysteries that defied the experts. When 2-year-old Brooke Rohrer first tells her mom and dad that she's in pain, they don't think too much of it. Little do they know, they're about to come face to face with a parent's worst nightmare.
You can't keep those thoughts out of your mind that, you might lose a child.
Then, just days after giving birth, Kelly Barbucio is blown away when her breast milk does something no doctor can explain.
It was the weirdest thing that I had ever seen.
When illness strikes, we look to doctors to give us answers. But what if they can't? For these unlucky patients, diagnosis is a mystery. When Todd and Julie Rohrer were married in the spring of 1996, they had one shared goal: to someday start a family.
Being a mom is what I've always wanted to do. In high school, my friends would say I want to do this and do that, and I just always answered I wanted to be a mom.
Settling into their new lives in Portland, Oregon, the young couple's first step is to establish themselves financially. While Todd builds a sporting goods business, Julie works as a flight attendant.
Our life just seemed to be really moving in a great forward direction.
4 years later, their son Miles is born. And in 2004, Julie gives birth to a happy, healthy daughter, Brooke.
And she was everything I wanted. I just felt like our family was complete.
Miles was the typical firstborn, patient, caring, attentive. Brooke was born instantly expecting things to be about Brooke.
She was a feisty, strong, sassy thing.
Of our two children, Brooke was certainly the more dramatic. She had that little actress in her.
The next few years go smoothly for the family of 4. But one day in the spring of 2007, Brooke comes to her mother with an unusual complaint.
Brooke came up to me and she said, "Mommy, my Russell hurts." I said, "What's your Russell? I don't know what a Russell is. Show me." And she was holding her right pelvic bone. And I said, "Did you bump it? Did you fall down?" And she said, "No." And I gave her a little rub and a little kiss and sent her on her way.
But over the next few days, Brooke continues to complain of pain in her right hip. Then Julie notices something odd about the way her daughter's moving.
She started walking a little funny. She would sort of hang her right hip back a little bit and wasn't quite walking in a normal way. And when she would drop her bunny, she would just squat, almost like a little old person, and reach out and grab it.
Brooke would occasionally say the same thing to Julie or to me: "My Russell hurts." And we still didn't know what Russell was. We would touch and feel and probe and hold her, but there was nothing there. No redness, no swelling. And in between times when she would tell us about this pain, she was a normal little girl. And that Brooke that we always wondered about, who had the actress in her, there was a side of you as a parent saying, "Is she looking for a little extra attention here?"
Unsure about what to do, Julie and Todd decide to wait and see if the problem goes away on its own. But just days later, while Brooke is playing with friends in the front yard, Julie's neighbor makes a troubling observation.
She said, "Julie, Brooke isn't out there tearing it up like she normally does." I said, "You're right." And I got down there and said, "Okay, Brooke, let's race." And tried to run alongside her, and she was doing this a fast race walk, wiggle walk, where her right hip would hang back a little bit. And I said, let's run. And she said, I am running, silly.
This seemed to be sort of a crystallizing moment where somebody who didn't see Brooke every hour of every day had noticed a dramatic change, and a change for the worse.
2 weeks after Brooke's first complaint, Julie schedules an appointment with her pediatrician.
I thought that they would find something relatively minor, and then it wouldn't be a big deal.
The doctor performs a thorough exam and orders x-rays of Brooke's pelvic region. But the images reveal nothing out of the ordinary.
The doctor drew some blood just to see if there was anything off with her blood, any inflammation or anything funny. It all came back good.
Unable to find anything wrong, the pediatrician suggests that Brooke may simply be experiencing growing pains.
I was thinking, I don't remember this type of pain with my son, and I don't remember my friends' kids having pain like this, and everybody grows. But knowing that the blood looked good and the x-rays looked good, I thought her pain will go away and everything will be all right.
But the very next night, at 3 o'clock in the morning, things take a terrifying turn.
She was screaming in a way that you can't even describe, and you're awake instantly.
I picked her up, and it reminded me of a scared cat, and they just sink their claws into you. She said, owie, 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 and she'd put her head down on my shoulder and fall asleep. And then 20 minutes later, it happened again. And then an hour later, it would happen again. I was, Mommy, I'm supposed to be able to kiss the boo-boos and make her better, and I couldn't do that. And to watch her in so much pain was so frustrating.
Worried that something could be seriously wrong with their daughter, the Rohrers scheduled an emergency appointment with a local pediatric orthopedist.
It seemed to make a lot of sense. Here's somebody who's going to be expert at spotting injuries on x-rays. We certainly were hoping that here's the answer.
But after thoroughly examining the little girl, the doctor can't find a single thing wrong with her.
He told us he couldn't help us, and I just thought, we're back to the drawing board.
You know, you just thought, God, you know, you're supposed to be getting some answers. And if it's not clear to the experts, then, well, then where do we go next?
For the last month, 3-year-old Brooke Rohrer has been complaining off and on about intense pain in her pelvis and hip. And while her doctors insist that she's perfectly healthy, her parents aren't buying it.
I was overfeeling that it was going to just work itself out and go away. It had been many weeks, and it wasn't getting better.
Now that we were paying so much more attention to Brooke's day-to-day activity, it was clear that she was in more frequent pain than she had been in the past, and she was kind of shutting down.
Desperate for answers, Julie and Todd check in with a new specialist, a pediatric surgeon.
We filled her in on the whole history, and she said, you know, I'd like an x-ray of her abdomen. And we weren't sure what she was going for at that point, but we went, got it back right away. And she sat with us and she said, I think I've found the source of your daughter's pain. She said, I think she's constipated.
The doctor explains to the Rohrers that severe constipation can often cause sharp pains in and around the abdominal area.
It was such a relief to hear that the solution was so simple. All we needed to do was make sure she was having a little more fruit in her diet.
I said, wow, that's shocking, because I wipe her bottom every day, and I know that she goes every day. She said she's dropping off boxcars, but the train hasn't left the station. You just want to move it all out.
The doctor instructs the Rohrers to give Brooke over-the-counter laxatives and suppositories. And at first, the treatment seems to work.
She seemed to be more comfortable. And we thought, gosh, maybe this is it. How wonderful if it's that simple.
But within 2 days, any hope that Brooke's problem is easy enough to solve with a laxative is gone.
It only took another episode to think maybe that this really wasn't the answer. I was laying on the couch, and Brookie was laying on her back on top of me, and Julie came in to help get her pajamas on.
I grabbed her leg, and she shot out such a squeal of pain from me moving her leg. Oh, I hurt her, but it was such a small, normal movement. That shouldn't hurt.
At their wits' end, the Rohrers make another appointment, this time with a pediatric rheumatologist. But after giving Brooke a thorough exam, he's also stumped. Then Julie has an idea. She prompts her daughter to do something she knows will trigger an episode.
I grabbed her special bunny and I dropped Bunny on the floor. And I said, "Pick up Bunny," and she did that slow ginger squat vertical back thing, and he was just like, wow, that's not right. That's not normal.
The doctor suggests that they run an MRI on Brooke so he can get a better look at her hip and the surrounding area.
I thought, this is going to bring us some answers. This is what we want. We're going to find out what's wrong.
The waiting was torturous. If you allow it to, it can just be all-consuming. And if your mind runs, you don't want to think about those things.
A long hour later, the doctor returns with the results.
He seemed a little somber, and that scared me. And he said, well, there are some findings. And I was so relieved. Finally, an answer.
But nothing could have prepared the worried parents for what he tells them next.
He said her L4 vertebrae is collapsed. And I remember feeling so shocked. Collapsed? He said it's just basically not there. It's a thin little layer of bone. It's shocking to see it because you see this beautiful spine, vertebrae disc, and then you get to her lumbar region and it's just a sliver of bone.
The doctor goes on to explain that the vertebra hasn't simply broken, it's disintegrated. And the implications of such a finding are beyond anything they could have imagined.
He said there's a list of things that it could be. None of them are good. Everything that he had to say ended in oma, emia, no words that you wanted to hear at all.
The room was just spinning. I didn't want to hear what he was saying. It was very, it was terrifying. It really was.
You can't keep those thoughts out of your mind that you might lose a child.
Julie and Todd Rohrer have just received devastating news. An MRI suggests their 3-year-old daughter Brooke is suffering from some form of degenerative disease, possibly cancer. Now, they're on their way to the Pediatric Oncology and Hematology Department at the hospital to find out exactly what they're dealing with.
I remember stopping at the doors of the oncology clinic and just staring at the sign on the door. And I just felt what happened to my life.
They're greeted by oncology and hematology specialist, Dr. Kevin Norwood.
The Rohrers were apprehensive, and anyone that walks into my office fears the worst until told otherwise. And so they were fearing for their child's life.
Dr. Norwood explains they'll need to conduct a biopsy of the tissue near the disintegrated vertebra to determine whether or not Brooke has cancer.
Knowing that they're going into her spine was pretty scary. Could she be paralyzed after this?
We got to the pediatric sedation unit, and Brookie climbed onto my lap, and we held each other as tight as we could.
And of course she's scared, and I remember telling Brooke, they're getting closer to finding out why you're hurting.
The procedure goes off without a hitch. Now all the family can do is wait.
It's hard to keep your focus when the most important thing is your daughter going to be okay? Waiting for that day to arrive. You want it to be here and you don't ever want it to come.
It's the longest week of the Rohrer's life, but 7 days after the biopsy, the results are finally in.
I was standing in the kitchen, it was evening time, and they called and said that they had some answers. They did have a diagnosis.
In Brooke's case, the tissue was sent down to the pathology department and stained, and through a battery of tests and stains that were performed on this, it was determined that she had Langerhans cell histiocytosis.
Langerhans cell histiocytosis, or LCH, is a rare blood disorder caused by an abnormality in a histiocyte, a type of white blood cell. In a healthy patient, histiocytes act as the body's frontline defense against infection. But in a patient with LCH, histiocytes become overactive, attacking and destroying the body's healthy tissue and organs. Unfortunately, the cause of LCH is unknown.
We do not know why Langerhans cell histiocytosis affects anyone. What we do know is that it's sort of an abnormality of the immune system. Langerhans cell histiocytosis would not be a classification of a cancer.
There was a little bit of relief that it wasn't one of the omas. We were a little more hopeful that, this is just something we're going to get through.
Dr. Norwood explains that LCH differs from cancer in an important regard. Unlike cancer cells, rogue histiocytes are not mutated or bad cells. On the contrary, they're good cells behaving badly.
In Brooke's case, they attacked her vertebra and pretty much ate the bone out from inside out, and the bone collapsed.
As the bone disintegrated, the area around it became inflamed and put pressure on the nerve connected to her hip.
The nerve roots that come out of the spine innervate all of the skin surface around her buttocks, all around her hip, and bending over would probably cause more irritation of that nerve and could cause excruciating pain.
They explained to us that it was radiating pain or referred pain.
All of a sudden, we understood why her Russell hurt.
But until he performs a full bone scan, Dr. Norwood won't know the extent of Brooke's disease. The LCH may be localized in that one section of her spine, or it could have spread throughout her entire body. And if it's not caught in time, the results could be grim.
Langerhans cell histiocytosis is fatal because it starts to spread, and the cells start to increase in number. And maybe they start to spread to the liver, they start to spread to the spleen, they start to spread to the bone marrow, and then you start to have failure of primary organs, and that can cause your death.
We just cried. The first day or two, I think I walked around in such shock. Our biggest fear was losing Brooke.
Julie and Todd Rohrer have just learned that their 3-year-old daughter, Brooke, has Langerhans cell histiocytosis, a rare blood disorder in which disease-fighting cells called histiocytes are attacking her spine. Now they're waiting for the results of a bone scan that will tell them if the disease has spread to other parts of her body.
It's this mix of hope and fear. You want the answer, but you're so scared to death of what you're going to hear.
When we finally got the results of the bone scan, she only had evidence of LCH in 2 places: the original spot with a collapsed vertebrae and a small spot on her right femur.
Dr. Norwood explains that Brooke will need to undergo chemotherapy. But unlike treatment for most forms of cancer, patients with LCH are administered a relatively low dose of chemo, in order to suppress the immune system.
Primarily, Brooke's chemotherapy was supposed to weaken the histiocytes, so they would stop attacking her body.
Brooke will also take a steroid to help reduce the inflammation around the nerve that's been causing her so much pain.
We knew we were in for a pretty long road of treatment.
3 weeks after her diagnosis, Brooke bravely begins the first round of chemotherapy. But the Rohrers know that the treatment also carries serious risks.
The therapy alone can cause you to have a more weakened immune system, so therefore you could die from a secondary infection.
It's a rough few months for the Rohrers, but after 12 arduous chemo sessions, the lesion in Brooke's femur finally begins to shrink. Eventually, she shifted to chemotherapy once every 3 weeks, and by the end of the year, things are definitely looking up.
She finished out the protocol. There's no active disease.
She responded well to the treatment. She had an improvement in her pain symptoms. Her overall outcome is 80% chance for survival. Brooke is still being evaluated every 3 months because there is a chance for Langerhans cell histiocytosis to return.
While it's hard to say how the disease will play out in Brooke's life, Dr. Norwood believes she won't have to limit her physical activity. In fact, part of her vertebra may ultimately regenerate on its own.
I hope that Brooke doesn't have any more pain and that she just grows to be a thriving, lovely, beautiful person.
With Brooke finally past the crisis, the Rohrers can't help wondering how so many doctors failed to diagnose her disease in the first place.
I thought, gosh, how did they miss this? We have x-rays of her spine.
Brooke's diagnosis took a while because when she was initially evaluated, all of the signs with what were seen on the MRI were not yet there. And Langerhans cell histiocytosis is seen in 3 to 5 per million children, meaning it's rare, very rare.
Today, nearly 2 years after her first symptoms set in, Brooke is thriving. But the Rohrers know there are no guarantees, and they're committed to giving their daughter the fullest life possible.
Right now, she's doing great. She's signed up for swimming lessons for the first time, and she's loving that.
If you didn't know better, you'd think she was just a normal little girl. She's never lost that spunk and sassiness that is her very nature.
Getting a diagnosis like that certainly does put things in perspective. We've certainly learned to not sweat the small stuff and let the small stuff run off our back, because we've seen big stuff at this point, and we know the difference.
While it took more than 2 months for anyone to realize that Brooke Rohrer was sick, from the moment that Kelly Barbucio brought her baby home, it was clear that something was very wrong. Kelly and Dominic Barbucio were working together in a New York City financial firm when they first fell in love. But once they decided to settle down, the young couple, both outdoor enthusiasts, began looking for a city near the mountains.
We moved to Fort Collins. We would go kayaking very often. I would jog almost every day.
Once we found out that she was pregnant, it was just one of the happiest days of my life.
Kelly sails through the pregnancy and grows more excited as her due date in July of 2007 approaches.
I was planning on not using any drugs when I finally had the baby and having just a natural birth.
But when she doesn't go into labor by her due date, Kelly's doctor orders an ultrasound. It reveals that the baby is breech and will have to be delivered by emergency cesarean section.
I was very upset. I didn't have any time to prepare for it. I was going to have to take all these drugs, and then the baby was just going to be kind of pulled out when he wasn't necessarily ready.
Kelly grows increasingly anxious as the medical team preps her for surgery with an IV, catheter, and an epidural.
The doctor came in and made me sign a waiver saying that I'm aware that I might die during this. I was very nervous.
Despite her fears, the procedure goes smoothly, and a few hours later, Kelly is holding their new son, Joey, in her arms.
They said you have a healthy baby boy and he's 7 pounds, 10 ounces.
I couldn't believe it that I had a son and that he was mine, and it's, the miracle of childbirth.
But when Kelly tries to feed her son for the first time, it's not the joyful moment she's been expecting.
I started trying to breastfeed the baby, and it hurt a lot. He was having a little bit of problem latching on. Every half hour, I would try again and again and again, and we had all different nurses coming in the room trying to assist, and it just wasn't working.
By the end of the first day, Kelly's breasts are engorged with milk, and the nurse suggests that she use a breast pump.
They said that it would help alleviate some of the pressure, so I said, okay, let's do it.
The pump does the trick for both mother and baby, and after 4 days, the Barbusios are discharged.
We went home, and everything was fine. At that point, I was just really looking forward to being a normal, happy little family.
But the day after Kelly gets home, she wakes up feeling sick.
I felt like I had the flu. My whole body ached. I got a fever. I just felt very drained.
I remember thinking that when you have a baby, there's a lot of changes going on in your body. It's easy to get run down, and that could make her a little more weak and susceptible to something. We all thought it's just something that's going to pass.
But Kelly continues to feel weak and feverish. Then, a week after her release from the hospital, she wakes up to a shocking sight.
I noticed in the mirror some red marks on my chest. Streaks on both sides covering my whole chest. And I went and showed my husband and said, I have stretch marks.
We didn't know if it was because she was using the pump, but it was very concerning.
And the next time Kelly tries to pump, she encounters a distressing new problem.
I started having a lot of difficulty pumping to where I would be doing it for 45 minutes straight, and I would only get a half an ounce out. My chest started hurting, and I would have deep, sharp stabbing pains.
Alarmed that she might not be able to feed Joey, Kelly immediately makes an appointment with the obstetrician.
I told him that I felt like I had the flu and I was very achy, and that I developed stretch marks all over my chest, and that I was having a lot of difficulty pumping, and the doctor felt at that point that I had mastitis.
Mastitis is a common infection in the mammary gland that often afflicts women who are breastfeeding. It can cause breast soreness, a red rash, chest pain, and flu-like symptoms. It can also clog milk ducts, making it difficult to nurse.
The doctor said to remedy it, I should start taking an antibiotic and put hot compresses on my chest.
The doctor assures her that the antibiotic is used by many nursing mothers and won't have any effect on Joey.
He said you'll start to feel better within a few days, so I was very happy.
Kelly returns home hopeful that the antibiotic will kick in soon. But nothing could have prepared her for what happens next.
I pumped the milk, and the baby was asleep, so I put it in the fridge for when he woke up for the next feeding. And when I went back to get the bottle, the milk was hot pink. I was like, what the hell? It was the weirdest thing that I had ever seen.
Ever since Kelly Barbusio brought her newborn son Joey home 12 days ago, nothing's gone smoothly. Joey can't nurse, and she's been diagnosed with mastitis, which makes it difficult and painful to pump milk. But now things have gotten really weird. Kelly's just discovered that the breast milk she stored in the refrigerator has turned an intense shade of pink.
I couldn't imagine what could possibly be wrong with it. I just couldn't even fathom that milk would turn hot pink.
We were just completely baffled by it. We didn't think that might have just been something that just happens when you have a baby. It doesn't look like a natural thing.
Mystified and alarmed, the family rushes to the pediatrician with Joey and a bottle of the pink milk.
And the doctor's response was, that's really weird. She didn't seem concerned about it. She had never heard of it before. The pediatrician said to keep feeding Joey the milk. It's the best thing for the baby. I was a little shocked. I wasn't really sure what to do.
The doctor assures Kelly the pink milk has nothing to do with her infection or the antibiotics she's been taking. Hoping it was just a one-time freak occurrence, Kelly goes home and resumes her feeding routine.
I tried pumping again and put it in the fridge, and it would turn hot pink again. Every single bottle would turn pink.
Soon, Kelly begins to develop her own theory. She wonders if the pinkness might be the result of an environmental contaminant, maybe a chemical leaching into the milk from the plastic bottle.
At that point, I called the bottle manufacturers thinking that the bottles must be defective.
But the manufacturer insists that they've never heard of such a thing.
They said they were going to send new ones out. They didn't have any other suggestions. They said that was the weirdest thing they'd ever heard.
Not sure what to do, Kelly switches Joey to formula, but she keeps pumping so her milk won't dry up. Then, one day as she's bottle feeding her son, a disturbing new development emerges.
Every 2 hours he would drink a bottle. I'd just set them all in the sink to wash. And within a few hours, I had about 10 pink bottles. It was like the Twilight Zone. It would be like if you woke up one morning and your hair was purple for no reason, and it kept happening every morning.
More baffled than ever, Kelly begins contacting specialists across the spectrum, from pediatricians to OBGYNs to epidemiologists.
They all had the same reaction, which was, I've never heard of such a thing. That's very strange. There was no conclusion.
At that point, I was worried, intrigued, and freaked out. I didn't know what to make of it.
On top of it all, Kelly is still battling severe mastitis. And although she's been taking antibiotics for several weeks, the mastitis appears to be getting worse and is more painful than ever.
Dominic would want me to hold the baby, and I just couldn't. My chest hurt so badly. The red streaks on my chest were getting worse. The clogged ducts were getting worse.
It wasn't getting any easier to pump. She would just be rocking herself and groaning and twisting in pain.
At the end of her rope, Kelly schedules an appointment with yet another OBGYN to see if he can help with the chronic mastitis. She isn't expecting anything new, but this doctor drops a bombshell.
The doctor said, I think this might not be an infection. This might be breast cancer. I was very afraid at that point in time. I thought that Dominic would have to raise Joey by himself and that I would never see the baby.
The doctor explains that the red streaks on Kelly's chest could be signs of inflammatory breast cancer, a rare and extremely aggressive form of the disease.
Inflammatory breast cancer is not good. That's one of the ones that are higher risk. A lot of people don't survive.
I was supposed to be this happy family life, and everything's supposed to be great, and everything's going the complete opposite direction. Every day and every week that went by, it was getting worse and worse.
The next day, Kelly undergoes an ultrasound to help determine if she's developed the life-threatening disease.
Kelly was very nervous, and she was asking, do you see anything, and how does it look?
Kelly and her mom anxiously look on as the doctor methodically goes over every inch of Kelly's breasts.
She said that she felt that everything was fine with Kelly and that she did not have breast cancer.
Relieved, Kelly returns home, but as far as her condition goes, she's back to square one.
I was still feeling really sick. The milk was still turning pink. I had no answers. And then I started having a lot of problems breathing.
When I got there, Kelly was lying on the couch. And I noticed that every few words that Kelly said, she would have to stop speaking to get a breath.
My mom decided that we should call an ambulance. I couldn't even walk to the bathroom because I couldn't breathe.
My worst fear was that my daughter would die right then and there.
Ever since giving birth 2 months ago, 30-year-old Kelly Barbucio has been plagued by strange problems associated with breastfeeding. She has developed a severe case of mastitis that won't go away. The breast milk she's been pumping keeps bizarrely turning bright pink, and now she's having trouble breathing. Terrified, Kelly and her mother are rushed to Poudre Valley Hospital in an ambulance. At the ER, she's met by emergency medicine specialist Dr. Eric Olson.
She seemed to have a lot going on. She seemed to be under a lot of stress. She was breathing fairly rapidly, hyperventilating. There's something about Kelly and her very complicated history that got my attention. In other words, there was more than meets the eye.
Kelly walks Dr. Olson through her various symptoms, the fevers, chest pain, and the strange red rash on her chest.
She said that on top of all of this, when she pumped her breast to make bottles for her new child, that her breast milk was turning pink. That was unusual, and not a lot of things do that. I asked her that if she had ever had her breast milk cultured. She told me she had not had this cultured. I assured her that we would at that time.
Kelly pumps her breasts, and Dr. Olson immediately sends the milk off to the lab for testing.
Dr. Olson told me that usually it takes 48 hours to grow out, and then as soon as they had their results, they would call me.
2 days later, Dr. Olson calls Kelly with the news she's been waiting for since her son was born.
Based on Kelly's symptoms and now the culture result, I thought it was quite clear that she had an infection that was caused from a bacteria called Serratia Marcescens.
Serratia Marcescens is a highly mobile bacteria that lives in warm, moist environments. It's found in most people and is usually harmless. But given the right conditions, Serratia can thrive, multiplying to the point where it overwhelms the body's defense mechanisms. If left unchecked, it can spread through the bloodstream, triggering potentially life-threatening complications.
Serratia is one of the unusual organisms that actually produces a pigment. This pigment tends to cause the reddish, pinkish tint that often accompanies Serratia infections.
Dr. Olson explains that it takes time for the bacteria to react to the air and temperature change. That's why Kelly's breast milk looked normal at first and then turned pink.
It's the bacteria itself which produces this pigment called prodigiosum. And so as the bacteria continues to replicate and produce this pigment, her breast milk would ultimately turn pink.
When he told me that, I was shocked. I was very happy that he finally found out what was wrong with me.
But Kelly can't help but wonder how it got into her system in the first place.
Serratia is one of those organisms that's actually found just about everywhere. It's a normal bacteria within our GI system, but there certainly are instances where instrumentations can introduce that bacteria into a person's system.
Since I had had a C-section, I probably got it from one of the catheters because it can live on catheters.
In addition to turning Kelly's breast milk pink, the Serratia was also at the root of her chronic mastitis.
In Kelly's case, it was likely the Serratia that was causing the infection, which led to the chest pain, the swelling and the clogging of her lacrimal ducts, the discomfort, and the rash that she was experiencing.
Her infection lingered because the Serratia was resistant to the antibiotics Kelly was taking. Dr. Olson goes on to explain that her breathing problems may also be traceable to the Serratia.
One of the common places that Serratia tends to colonize in people is in their lungs. Serratia could have had something to do with her breathing problems.
The fact that the Serratia was in her lungs means it was probably also in her blood. And if it had persisted much longer, the results could have been devastating.
It could have started causing multi-organ system failure. You have a lot of organs that are so overcome by either the bacteria themselves or the toxins which the bacteria produces, so that the organ is not able to continue with its normal function, and it can actually die We call that multi-system failure.
If Dr. Olson hadn't discovered what was wrong with me, I could definitely have died from it.
What really stuns Kelly, though, is that Joey is testing positive for Serratia too. She'd passed it on to him unknowingly while she was feeding him the infected breast milk. Finally, it's clear why the formula in his bottle was also changing color. Joey was contaminating it with his saliva when he drank.
That was the worst news to hear, that he had what I had, because it was so debilitating for me, and he was just a little baby.
My worst fear was that he might not make it.
Finding a treatment for Kelly and Joey is imperative, but it's tricky.
It's resistant to a lot of antibiotics. Fortunately, with most culture results, the bacteria is tested against a number of different medicines to tell you what it's sensitive to and what it's resistant to.
After several rounds of testing, Dr. Olson finally hits on a particularly strong antibiotic that he feels has a good chance of killing Kelly's Serratia.
Within a couple of days, I started noticing the red streaks were going away. My breathing problems went away. My body wasn't hurting anymore, and I felt like a normal person again.
But Joey's treatment is far more complicated.
Because the antibiotics were so strong that in babies, it can cause blindness and permanent disabilities. They said as long as he was still growing and gaining weight, they wouldn't treat him.
You don't want to hear, just wait it out and see what happens, because it could be fatal.
So Kelly decides to take matters into her own hands. Researching bacterial infections on the internet, she stumbles onto a probiotic supplement that she hopes will naturally replace the unhealthy bacteria growing in Joey's system.
A month later, I had him recultured and it was completely gone.
With the crisis averted and Kelly back to feeding Joey breast milk, the family can't help but wonder why no one was able to link the mastitis and the pink milk to Serratia.
Serratia tends to be found more commonly in certain areas, the urinary tract, the respiratory system. Having Serratia in breast tissue is really a rare finding. The literature has very few references to any Serratia mastitis. In fact, the only references of Serratia causing mastitis tends to be in goats and cows.
But Dr. Olson is optimistic that the Serratia is finally gone for good.
Since we've treated the infection, the likelihood of recurrence is not very good. It would basically be the same as mine or anybody else's.
Today, Kelly is fully recovered, and the Barbusios are finally getting a chance to live the life they always dreamed of.
Kelly, after that, she's back to her old self. She's just happy and excited, and it's good times over at our house.
I've been Serratia-free for 16 months, and Joey has been Serratia-free for about a year.
But as physically and emotionally painful as the experience was, it's given Kelly a new sense of empowerment.
The lessons I learned from this were to stick to what you think and not give up. Because if you know there's something wrong with you, there's something wrong with you, no matter who tells you there's not.